for bringing on the competition in the mortgage market in about 2013. So if you want to find one single thing that lies at the heart of a lot of what's wrong that we've been talking about this hour, that.
You do hear what Leonie's more leaning towards international parity when it comes to some of these global leaders. These are global leaders in a sense.
I know,
David.
But you don't like it. Globally, we've got a kind of a difficulty too, and Leonie accurately identified another tension we've got here, and that is that overall pay has risen globally in the last 30 years, thanks to internationalisation. But there's a whole chunk of people, and it's essentially the first world middle class, who have been utterly squeezed for the last 30 years. And something is out of whack, and I really wish we could find a better arrangement that means everybody is fairly rewarded for what they do.
On a final note on this topic, Leonie, in terms of gender parity, where, in your opinion, do you think we're at here in New Zealand?
Yeah, look, I think there's areas where there's certainly been some big progress. I mean, I think different sectors in different places. I mean, it's a lot more. There's a lot more awareness of it. I think a lot more organisations are working towards it. But I think you've got to sort of look at each sector and see what's going on in each sector. And but look, I think we're making great strides around the whole diversity and inclusion, because to me it's bigger than just gender. It's also ethnicity and a whole lot of other things. So yes, there's a lot of areas making great positive steps, and as we do that, that brings the pay equity as well, because these things are all packaged together. So look, I'm quite heartened in what I see in the business world.
Leonie Freeman, David Slack with us this afternoon. And just on a final note, briefly, the Guardian article caught my attention. Sign of the Times, how the signature became a meaningless scrawl. Written signatures will soon be redundant, even for legal documents, the Law Commission has said. This is in the UK. The body has ruled that electronic signatures are in most cases a viable alternative to handwritten ones. And apparently the handwritten signature had a relatively short life anyway, as a legally binding flourish. So if this does spell the end, does anyone care if the modern world means the increasing invalidity of the signature? What do you think?
I reckon we should go back to the seal. You've got to seal a thing, because that would slow everything down. We're doing everything too damn fast.
Yeah, no, actually, where I reckon it's going to go is it's going to be either a fingerprint or an eye scan.
Yeah,
That's where we're going.
And that always takes me back to, I don't know if it was Terminator or some movie like that, where they got around that by using somebody else's eyeball. That's the
only fear, that they chop your finger off or they cut your eye out, but that's where I reckon we're going.
But would you miss the signature? Because I recall people who practiced it. They were proud of their beautiful flourish.
Actually, listeners, you can't see this, but I'm just showing Leona and Wallace me logging onto my iPhone by putting my face at it. And I think this is absolutely beautiful. Yeah, face recognition. This is beautiful for me because it looks at the map of your face. There's no one in the world with this nose, ladies and gentlemen. Nobody. I'm golden. I'm happy with this.
Did you used to practice your signature when you were...
Absolutely.
Did you?
Yeah, my dad, when I was young, he said, no, you got to get the signature right.
Is that right?
Yep.
And how's it now?
It's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
A bit looser, but it's still pretty similar.
Mine's a shocker. I can hardly write. It's a scrawl. You have been fantastic for our Friday's panel. David Slack and Leonie Freeman. I'm Wallace Chapman. Thank you very much to Melita Towell for putting the week together. See you next week from 3:45 Monday. Bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, Customs seizes enough meth to feed the habits of all our users for 6 months. Overseas drug syndicates targeting New Zealand. A former gang leader is jailed again, this time for his part in a killing. Shane Jones, complete with a conductor's hat, blows the starter's whistle on the rebuild of rail from Auckland to Whangarei. Is talk of a second commercial airport in Auckland pie in the sky, or could it actually fly? We talked to the boss of Air New Zealand. As well as planes and trains, we've got a boat too. Team New Zealand officially launches its first Cup yacht. A remarkable tale of survival in Hurricane Dorian's 400km/h winds too.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The family of a man who died in a chokehold have given heartfelt victim impact statements at the sentencing of 3 people involved in his death. 26-year-old Mitchell Patterson died in the back of a car in Hamilton last year, and his body was later thrown off a bridge over the McLaren Falls in Bay of Plenty. His mother, Valerie Patterson, asked those responsible for her only child's death if they knew what they had done to her family. His father, Craig Patterson, made it plain what he thought of those being sentenced today in the High Court in Hamilton.
You 3 cowards have no idea what you have done to our family and close friends, and I doubt you even care. You all chose to participate in the cowardly act that has brought us here today. You are all despicable, and I despise all of you with every bone in my body.
Craig Patterson. 8 people have now been sentenced over Mitchell Patterson's death. Customs says the largest shipment of methamphetamine ever intercepted was likely not the first to reach this country, nor will it be the last. Just under half a tonne of the drug was found hidden in a shipment of electric motors from Thailand at ports of Auckland last month. Customs says it's been working with Canadian and Thai authorities to target shipments and syndicates. Its investigations manager, Bruce Perry, says a further 15 kilograms of the drug was recovered through the use of search warrants last night, as well as tens of thousands of dollars in cash.
You have Canadian syndicates that are targeting New Zealand. I think this shipment is clear evidence of that. We've got evidence of previous shipments by the same group into New Zealand. We can only assume of the same size.
Bruce Perry. 2 Canadians and a New Zealander have been arrested, and the police say further arrests are likely. Hundreds of people remain unaccounted for in the Bahamas as the death toll from Hurricane Dorian keeps climbing. The official number of deaths rose to 30 today, but 200 body bags are being sent to the devastated Abaco Islands, where officials say the eventual toll could be staggering. Sam Tasha has been out helping the rescue effort in Grand Bahama.
There's absolute devastation. People are in desperate need of water. Lots of missing people still, a few dead bodies, but people still with resilient spirits, the community definitely coming together. People saying that they're going to be rebuilding, but also still shell-shocked in many ways. No one has seen anything like this before.
Sam Tasha. Dorian is now battering the coasts of North and South Carolina. A former mayor of the far north, Wayne Brown, says a rebuilt rail line to Auckland will be a game changer for Northland. The Regional Economic Development Minister, Shane Jones, has announced that $95 million from the Provincial Growth Fund will be spent on the line. Mr Brown, who heads up the government's Upper North Island Freight Study, says Northland is poised for development.
Jonesy said it's about fixing a neglected area. That's true as well, but in fact this is going to have a big impact on the country because Auckland is not an exporter, it's an importer. And the region's export, and this is going to be a big export region. And this is an absolutely essential part of it.
Wayne Brown says a revamped rail freight service to Auckland will open up options for businesses to move north. 2 building companies have been liquidated and a crane company has been placed in receivership. More than 200 workers and several projects are affected by the failures in Auckland and Waikato. Ben Strang reports.
The liquidator at Matamata-based Stanley Group and a related company, Tallwood, said most of the 120 staff in Waikato and Auckland have been laid off. Michael Turner says the aim is to hand back incomplete building projects to Housing New Zealand and to private developers in Thames and Hobsonville. At Tower Cranes, the receiver, Lara Bennett, says the 90 staff are back on various projects today. She says while the company is still trading, it's too early to say what the final outcome is likely to be until creditors have lodged claims. Tower Cranes grew swiftly, fuelled by the Auckland building boom, but the industry has been beset by shortages of crane drivers. This is Ben Strang.
A second person has died in the US from a severe lung disease apparently caused by vaping. They reportedly fell ill after trying a product bought at a dispensary for recreational cannabis in the state of Oregon. The first vaping death was reported in Illinois last month. Experts are investigating a mysterious lung disease linked to the use of e-cigarettes that has affected 200 people in the US since June. Several of the cases involve vaping THC, the main active compound in cannabis. A 46-year-old American woman who allegedly tried to smuggle a 6-day-old baby boy out of the Philippines has been charged with human trafficking. More on this from the BBC's Howard Johnson in Manila.
CCTV footage appears to show Jennifer Talbot passing through Manila International Airport, holding the baby in a bag close to her body. Jennifer Talbot, a 43-year-old originally from Ohio, was able to pass through the airport immigration counter without declaring the baby boy, but was intercepted at the boarding gate by airline personnel. Ms. Talbot is alleged to have presented a notarized consent form from the mother of the child, agreeing to allow travel to America, although the form had not been signed. The infant's parents have now been charged under child protection law, while the boy has been placed in the custody of social services.
Howard Johnson reporting. It's 5:05. The Silver Ferns greats Laura Langman and Maria Folau have shelved any plans of retirement and will play against Australia in next month's Constellation Cup series. Both were key figures in New Zealand's World Cup triumph, but it had been thought they could follow veteran defender Casey Korpua into retirement. The pair have been named in a 16-strong squad that will be trimmed to 12 ahead of the 4-match series. Coach Nolene Taurua says she discussed retirement with Langman and Folau, but is pleased they've committed to both the Constellation Cup and the Northern Quad Series in England in January.
There has been discussions about that and what they wanted to do, and, you know, it may be still in their long-term plans, but I don't know if I was surprised, but I was really excited, if I can put it that way. I felt that we made great strides at the Netball World Cup, and to have those two back in the mix or wanting to be there is fantastic.
Nolene Taurua. Serena Williams has moved to the brink of a record-equalling 24th career Grand Slam tennis title, storming past Elina Svitolova 6-3, 6-1 to book her spot in the US Open final. Williams, who announced earlier this week that she'll play in the ASB Classic in Auckland in January, will play Canadian teenager Bianca Andreescu for the title. And Bob Carter has been appointed White Ferns coach through until the end of 2021 Women's Cricket World Cup series. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, teenagers getting the hang of country life. Tom Sainsbury, the comedian who put Paula Bennett on the map, selects the mixtape. The Exponents are our Friday Night Live act. And Frank Natali presents a brief guide to the element indium, which, because of its physical characteristics, has inspired a sonic tonic dedicated to softness. On Nights, you know you're soaking in it. After the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to North Taranaki, including Taumaranui, also Coromandel Peninsula. Showers, some heavy, possible thunderstorms and hail from Auckland northwards. Showers gradually easing tomorrow. Southwesterly gales in Northland easing tonight. Bay of Plenty and Taupo, mostly cloudy with a few showers, clearing tomorrow. The remainder of the North Island, also Marlborough. Occasional rain with snow about the Desert Road overnight, clearing tomorrow morning. But the chance of a shower remains in Marlborough and Wairarapa. Southwesterly gales this evening and overnight for Wellington, Wairarapa and Marlborough. For Nelson and Buller, showers clearing from the south today, mainly fine tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, fine. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy. Showers becoming confined to the coast tomorrow morning and becoming fine inland. Chatham Islands, periods of rain with low cloud and fog. RNZ National, it's 5:08.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Enough meth to supply the country's users for 6 months has been stopped at the border in Customs' largest ever bust. Just under 500 kilos of the Class A drug was found in a shipment of electric motors after an investigation into a transnational drug syndicate. And authorities say overseas drug syndicates are targeting New Zealand. Tom Furley has more.
Back in June, Customs and the police learned people were staying in New Zealand for the sole purpose of receiving and distributing a shipment of methamphetamine. Customs Investigations Manager Bruce Berry says they began to track a company set out to import large quantities of drugs, and last month a major shipment of motors from Thailand was stopped.
Concealed within the electric motors was a total of 469 kilograms of methamphetamine. Each of the 60 motors had approximately 8 kilograms of methamphetamine concealed within the internal workings of the motor. This was an extremely sophisticated and complex importation by an organised criminal syndicate.
Mr Berry says the methamphetamine has a street value of $235 million. Detective Superintendent Greg Williams says the seizure has prevented major harm among New Zealand's most vulnerable communities.
To give you an idea of the scale of this, based on our wastewater analysis, the amount seized would have equated to between 22 and 26 weeks of total supply for the country. So that's nearly half a year's supply to the country. And if it had got out into the community, would have generated about $600 million in social harm based on the drug harm index.
Last night, 65 customs and police staff searched 9 properties, recovering a further 15 kg of meth, tens of thousands of dollars in cash and a handgun. 2 Canadians and a New Zealander were arrested and faced charges of importing and possession for supply. Bruce Berry says they've been working with Canadian and Thai authorities to try to tackle international syndicates.
You have Canadian syndicates that are targeting New Zealand. I think this shipment is clear evidence of that. We've got evidence of previous shipments by the same group into New Zealand. We can only assume of the same size. The 15 kilograms of methamphetamine recovered, we believe, was from a previous shipment.
He says more travellers are being used to help smuggle drugs between countries. He says they're using Airbnb and storage lockers as part of their trade, and people need to be wary.
It's a common methodology for them to come through and rent accommodation for an extended period of time. They'll usually pay cash, and they'll use those premises to facilitate their operations by either receiving commercial shipments there or use them as safe houses.
The 3 people appeared in the Auckland District Court today, charged with importing a Class A controlled drug and possession for supply. The police say further charges and arrests are likely. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
And in breaking news, it's being reported that the ex-president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, has died at the age of 95. The BBC says his family confirmed his death. Mr Mugabe was ousted from power in a military coup in November 2017, ending his 3-decade reign. Zimbabwe's Education Secretary has tweeted, "Rest in peace, Robert Mugabe." Back home now, Air New Zealand boss Christopher Luxon says investigating options for a second commercial airport in Auckland is not about putting the squeeze on the current operator, it's about cheaper airfares and cutting the commute time for travellers. The airline's revealed it's in the final stages of assessing the viability of flying out of the Defence Force-owned Whenuapai Air Base in northwest Auckland, but hasn't yet discussed its proposal with the government. Mr Luxon, who's set to leave Air New Zealand later this month, says customers tell him transport to Auckland Airport is suboptimal and a second airport could solve those problems. So how serious is he about the idea?
Oh, look, we're really serious. We're getting a lot of feedback from our customers, and we have for some time, about how do you get better transport options to the airport and how do you get cheaper airfares, and I think Whenuapai has the potential to offer us both.
OK, so what would the deal be then? How expensive would it be to set up an operation there? Is it realistic?
Yeah, well, I think that's the real attraction of this, is that Whenuapai is an underutilised asset, and the reality is we could run mixed military and civil aviation out of that one airport. It's done, actually, Lisa, around Honolulu, it's done in Brussels, it's done in several airports all around the world. And so actually any adjustments that we have to make, whether we have to think about, it won't be gold-plated, but imagine if we put a terminal there, any other adjustments to a runway, they're very digestible amounts of investment that a consortium or players could put together.
So what's digestible? Put a figure on it for me.
Oh, look, I mean, if you're talking $100 or $200 million, that's a very digestible sort of amount versus several billion in building a brand new airport. And so that's the trade-off here.
And who would stump up that?
Well, you could imagine a consortium of iwi, infrastructure companies, even Air New Zealand, and others that might want to get involved. It would be a very manageable thing. And
how many flights in and out of there would you need to do a day to make it viable?
Well, look, I mean, at this stage, what we're talking about is 10 return flights a day to several locations across New Zealand. To give you a feel for it, we do 280 movements in and out of out of the Auckland domestic terminal. So we're talking, Auckland Airport will be our primary airport, but what we're trying to say here is in a city that grows north and south, why wouldn't you actually, when you've got half the population living in North Shore and also in West Auckland, why wouldn't you actually open up and take some of the pressure off Auckland Airport as a result and our transport system?
What conversations have you had with government about this?
Well, look, I mean, the reality is that, this has been a topic of conversation over the last 10 to 15 years in the public domain. We actually use the airport
but
as
what
an alternate.
serious conversations have you had with government about this? Because this is part of the defence estate, so what conversations have there been?
So the Minister launched a review, I think, 6 weeks ago. We got hit with a media request yesterday, and we're actually we want to sit down with government in the short term and actually have a really good conversation about it.
So you haven't had any conversations with government now?
We've had ongoing conversations with Ministry of Defence about the whenua pai being used as a mixed-use infrastructure for some time. Yeah.
When was the last conversation you had?
Well, I remember over my 7 years, we've had several over the last few years, talking with the different members of the military around that. But we want to sit down and have a deep, proper conversation with the ministry in the next few weeks.
What I'm trying to get is a sense of urgency here. So have there been conversations in the last 12 months or not?
No, what's happened here is 6 weeks ago, the Minister launched a review of the future of whenua pai. Yesterday, a journalist asked us a question about what do we think about that. We gave an answer to that, which we actually shared with the Ministry and gave them a heads up for in advance. And what we're saying is this is a good conversation. We've got an infrastructure crisis in the country. Auckland's creaking. Why don't we actually have this conversation, a pragmatic one? So we will deeply engage with the government. That's the first step that we need to do. Then we'll talk to the community.
So the Defence Estate Review is on currently at the moment. Have you sent any submissions or suggestions to that review?
No, not really.
Are you going to?
We will, yes, we will.
So when does that close? When are you going to do that by?
Not sure. I think what I'm saying is we're going to sit down with the government and have a proper conversation in the next few weeks.
Are you really serious about this? Because that review closes on the 30th of this month, right? And I'm wondering, Ron Mark, the Defence Minister, has said he thinks that your idea is half-baked and he's questioning your motives for going public with it at this stage. What other motives do you have for going public with it right now?
No, look, our motives are very clear. We get a lot of pushback to say that Auckland is a city under huge infrastructure constraints, right? Auckland Airport is a suboptimal experience, has been for some time, likely will be with the rebuild going forward. And you can't tell me that's a world-class piece of infrastructure that we see in other advanced economies around the world. We have a review that was launched 6 weeks ago about the future of whenua pai. We'll input into that properly. We'll have a deep conversation around it. It's right that we have the conversation because in New Zealand, we can sit here and criticise the lack of infrastructure and say it's not good enough, but why wouldn't we have a brave conversation and actually understand the different viewpoints in it and actually try and work out a solution?
So have you started a submission? Is a submission underway from Air New Zealand on that Defence Estate Review?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yep.
So how much leverage would a second airport give you with Auckland Airport when it comes to negotiating things like, landing charges?
Well, look, I think the reality for us is Auckland Airport's always going to remain our primary airport. The volume of traffic, as I said, 400 total flights going in a day, 280 domestic flights alone. So that's going to always be the anchor point for our business, no doubt about it. What we're talking about is an overflow secondary airport here. It would come with lower costs, no doubt about it. To give you a feel for it, across domestic New Zealand, landing charges, airport charges, other agency charges are 20 to 30% of an average airfare, depending on which aircraft you're trying to fly. And as a result, this would be a much cheaper option.
Yeah, so it would give you some leverage. That is one of the key advantages for you, isn't it, to have another airport?
It may be.
To put the squeeze on Auckland Airport.
No, the real motivation is you can't sit in a country where we've, over the last 5 years, had 3 million more passengers go through Auckland Domestic Airport and nothing has changed in the size of that terminal since 1966. So you either face up to that reality and those facts and actually choose to do something about it or to have a braver conversation about it, or you don't.
Yeah,
and otherwise
they're renovating it now, though, aren't they? They're doing an extensive renovation now, aren't they?
And we're involved with all of that. We're well involved with the master plan, supportive of all of that stuff. But the reality is we have a really a major pressure point. It's not a great experience. It's unlikely to be a great experience. Walking on a blue line might have been great in 1985 going from domestic to international in the rain. It's not particularly fun for an international visitor coming to New Zealand and saying, is this a world-class place or not? So we know they'll get there. We're very supportive of all of that. We'll continue to be supportive of Auckland Airport. But what we're saying is we've got an underutilised asset owned by the taxpayer that could support mixed and commercial aviation. Why wouldn't we have the conversation?
But if you're upfront about it, this is partly leverage too, isn't it? It's putting the pressure on Auckland Airport to lift its game by saying, hey, we've got somewhere else to go.
Yeah, you might say that. I disagree with that, yeah.
You're a businessman. Competition allows you to have leverage. Surely that is part of the plan here.
Yeah, well, look, I think competition would be a good thing. It would be a byproduct of this decision, but it's not the primary reason for why we've opened this conversation. It is genuinely saying Auckland has grown tremendously. It's expanded on the north and south. You actually need to be able to, there could be a much better option. Taking 90 minutes to get from the shore when there isn't an accident on the bridge or on the motorway isn't really acceptable. And so why wouldn't we actually ask that, why would we think about, well, let's have a discussion about what else we could do at Whenuapai, and use it properly.
All right, then what about the neighbours? Because really, are they going to buy into this? A lot has happened over the years, and this is a primary development area, housing development area. I mean, how welcoming do you think the locals are going to be to this concept?
I think that's right. I mean, we want to have proper community consultation. What I'm saying to you, though, is it's a very much a secondary overflow airport. You're talking about 20, movements or 10 return flights in the course of daylight hours is what we would be proposing and what we're looking at and what we're trying to stack up for our submission. As we go into
But as you'll be aware, people in those suburbs and that part of the city, they fought hard against an airport previously, there, a commercial airport.
Yeah, but just because it was a bad idea 10 or 15 years ago doesn't mean that it's not a good idea today, right? I mean, it's right that we should still open it up and actually ask a question. And we can work in consultation with the community, work out what the constraints need to be, actually have those conversations. So I think there's a lot of people in that area, as I've seen over the course of today, and the customers writing to me saying, hey, listen, I would really appreciate being able to do a day's work in Christchurch and or Wellington and be able to leave from here and get in and out of my commute time and back to my family in a much quicker time frame. And so I think there'd be a lot of new jobs created, or some new jobs created in that space as well. So I wouldn't want to presuppose just because it didn't work before that it's just if that's the way we always think about things, we'll never entertain anything new.
Is this a plan you're going to push when you're in Parliament?
Look, I appreciate all the career advice I've been getting over the last few months, but the reality is I'm the CEO of Air New Zealand until midnight on September the 25th, and this is an Air New Zealand issue, and we've got an opportunity with the review opening up 6 weeks ago, submissions due very shortly, for us to actually input into that. And so I'll deal with what I have to deal with after the 25th, but at the moment, I'm the CEO of Air New Zealand. This is a good conversation to us to have.
Have you spoken to opposition parties about what their position is on a commercial airport at Whenuapai?
No, we haven't.
Wouldn't that be prudent?
Well, no, but we're responding to a submission, and we'll make our own submission through the lens of Air New Zealand. Other stakeholders in the process will make their comments.
So when you're out of work nearing the end of this month, what happens?
What? Sorry, say that again.
When you're out of work at the end of this month, what are you going to do?
Well, the first thing is I'll probably wake up, I'll fall out of bed, I'll lie in the fetal position on the floor for a bit and bawl my eyes out for 6 hours, and then I'll get off the floor and work out what I do next. Hey,
that commercial airport would be in the Upper Harbour electorate. Do you reckon an MP could get themselves, or could a person get themselves elected in Upper Harbour, that electorate, if they were pushing for a commercial airline? That would be something they probably need to be a bit careful about, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I've got no idea about that, Lisa.
And that's the boss of Air New Zealand, Christopher Luxon, until actually midnight on the 25th of September, as he says he's outgoing. Really interested to know what you think of this idea of a second commercial airport in Auckland at Whenuapai. Would you use it? If you live out there, I'm really interested to hear from you as well. Would you be happy to have commercial flights going in and out there? Because it's now, it's quite developed in terms of housing. You can get in touch by texting us, 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is almost 24 minutes after 5. There's jubilation in Northland today with the news that the government is to rebuild the railway line from Auckland to Whangarei. The Regional Economic Development Minister, Shane Jones, made the announcement at the Helensville railway station at a function that almost turned into a party and ended with a train ride for the happy hordes. Our reporter Lois Williams and cameraman Nick Munro filed this report.
All aboard the Northern Express. Kia ora tātou.
A beaming Shane Jones, kitted out in a conductor's cap, blew the whistle with gusto. And Kiwi Rail staff called the tune, to the great amusement of the crowd. The stunt capped an announcement long hoped for by the audience of business people, local government worthies, Māori leaders and Save Northland Rail campaigners. The Provincial Growth Fund will invest $94.8 million in rebuilding the line that connects Whangarei to Auckland. Shane Jones told the crowd without that infusion, the long-neglected line was doomed.
So today is actually an engagement of 11th hour character, because without an infusion by the owner of the railway in terms of the northern spine in the Northern Line, its mothballing closure is a dead certainty.
Kiwi Rail's Chief Executive Greg Miller says reviving the tired old railway line will take a year and it'll be a big job.
There's a lot to do, 50,000 sleepers, 50,000 tonne of ballast, 54 kilometres of new track, 7 bridges fully replaced, and all the tunnel lining and tunnel lowering work to be investigated.
The work will mean freight trains can travel at 70 kilometres per hour instead of 40 as they do now, and the trip to Auckland will take 5 hours instead of 7. And lowering the ground level of the old tunnels will mean they can take modern containers. Shane Jones was rather hoping the pesky tunnels could be blown up.
I was hoping that today there might have been the opportunity to play a key role in detonating one of the tunnels. I understand the term is called daylighting the tunnels. So in the event, Greg Miller, you come back with a further proposal to the ministers, I'm putting my hand up before Winston Peters to blow myself into the future.
And it's a future that local business people suddenly see as a lot brighter. Wayne Brown, who's heading the government's Upper North Island freight study, says a viable railway line connecting the region to points south will be a game changer. He says Northland now is where the Bay of Plenty was in the 70s, before the Kaimai Tunnel was built. And a revamped rail freight service to Auckland will open up the options for businesses, exporters and growers to move north for cheaper land.
Jonesy said it's about fixing a neglected area. That's true as well, but in fact this is going to have a big impact on the country, because Auckland is not an exporter, it's an importer. And the region's export, and this is going to be a big export region. And this is an absolutely essential part of it.
Peter Tipene, who chairs the Waitangi National Trust, seconds that.
It means a lot more opportunity, because once the line is put in, business will grow around it. So people will be encouraged to bring their businesses north, knowing they've got other options in terms of moving freight.
And Bruce Plested, the chair and founder of Main Freight, the country's biggest freight mover, says the revamped North Auckland line will undoubtedly take more than a few trucks off the road.
We do 28 trucks a day into Whangarei, and we will probably halve that and send half of it by rail.
Kiwi Rail boss Greg Miller says work starts tomorrow on rebuilding the Railway North, and by this time next year, the freight trains will be running safely and on time. In Helensville for Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
Residents of Manawa Cay in the Abaco Islands have described the hell of surviving Hurricane Dorian, which at its peak brought harrowing winds of up to 400 kilometres an hour. The Category 5 storm was the strongest ever to hit the Bahamas, with one resident describing the horror as being like an atomic bomb going off. This from CNN's Paula Newton.
It is so much worse than they had feared. The Abaco Islands forever scarred now by mass destruction. Home after home, entire rooftops blown away, debris scattered in unrecognizable heaps, boats tossed like confetti. The images belie the obvious question: how could anyone survive this?
Don't tell me, get here. Okay.
Paul.
You're okay. You're gonna be okay? You're gonna be okay, Paul.
We arrived by helicopter in Manawar in Abaco with Billy Aubrey, embracing his wife Shauna after days of not knowing if she was dead or alive. Shauna hunkered down with friends in their seaside home until the roof blew off, and they all scrambled to find anything still standing.
So Nancy, this is what kept you guys alive, this little bathroom.
This little room kept us alive. This is it. We came in and hunkered down, and Shauna was on the ground crying, and we were just trying to...
hysterical. What did it sound like in here at the time? Oh, it was loud. It was there was a lot of crashing and remember all the crashing and banging and whirling and
stuff we thought was coming through this wall.
So many in the Abaco Islands lived through hours that resembled a horror movie, exposed to winds that topped 215 miles an hour, like tornadoes touching down every minute.
Words can't describe it. I don't wish it on nobody. Nobody, words can't describe it. They could never categorize this. Never.
My grandfather ran out.
It was like an atomic bomb went off.
Residents here tell me their little island paradise is unrecognizable even to them. They're resourceful and self-reliant, they say, but they could have never imagined a storm as powerful as Dorian. You know, there's no better way to describe to you the force of Hurricane Dorian, to be right here where people rode out the storm in their living rooms, in their dining rooms. I mean, look at this. The roof blew off the house here. The entire kitchen came down. Their refrigerator ended up here on the ground. Their living room and dining room furniture is strewn all over. People describe these things being tossed around the island like projectiles. They all hovered in their bathrooms, in closets, anything they could find to take shelter. There are now the beginnings of recovery, but only the basics. Medical attention, private helicopters to take out those who are sick, the elderly, young families.
I'm sure it'll never be the same again, but I mean, the people are strong here and we're going to try to do our best to rebuild the best way we can, but we know it'll never be the same.
This was a storm of biblical proportions, Abaconians tell me. And yes, they worry. It will take a miracle to recover from it all.
Paula Newton reporting. Up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, a former gang leader is headed back to jail for his part in a killing. We've had trains and planes, time for a boat now with Team New Zealand's official launch. And it's Friday. How about a 55,000 pound bear? We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
Further arrests are likely after the interception of the largest ever shipment of methamphetamine to reach this country. 2 Canadians and a New Zealander have already been arrested. Just under half a tonne of the Class A drug was found hidden inside a shipment of electric motors from Thailand. The former Zimbabwe president, Robert Mugabe, has died aged 95. He died in a hospital in Singapore. He was the first leader of Zimbabwe after independence, governing from 1980 to 2017. Mr. Mugabe was accused of vote rigging, embezzlement and breaches of human rights before being ousted from power in a military coup in 2017. The family of a man who died in a chokehold have given heartfelt victim impact statements at the sentencing of 3 people involved in his death. 26-year-old Mitchell Patterson died in the back of a car last year, and his body was later thrown off a bridge over the McLaren Falls in Bay of Plenty. His father, Craig Patterson, said he believed those involved had no understanding of the pain they had caused. The death toll from Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas is expected to climb sharply, and aid efforts are being stepped up. The official toll stands at 30. Morticians and 200 body bags are being sent to the Abaco Islands, the worst hit part of the archipelago. Security at Parliament has been tightened after a small number of protesters attempted to charge into Bowen House this afternoon. RNZ understand the activists that tried to enter the parliamentary office block but were removed by security guards. The main entrance to the Beehive has been locked and the Lambton Quay entrance to Bowen House has been shut down. Part of State Highway 1 in Whangarei is closed as police officers carry out an arrest warrant. The Armed Offenders Squad is attending and local schools have been notified. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and you've come at just the right time because it's business news with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona.
Hello.
Happy Friday.
Yes, indeed.
Hey, Fonterra has delayed its annual financial results, making them public. Why? What's going on?
Well, they were supposed to release them next week. This is sort of it's pre-booked, so it was expected that's when it was going to come out. But they came out today, surprising the market and saying, look, we're not ready, so we're going to delay it till sometime near the end of the month. They've got till the end of the month to report. We'll find out what happens then. We already know that the company is forecasting a $675 million loss for this financial year. They're also writing off, $860 million of the value of assets. But they say they need a bit more time to go through all of this, and they've delayed it, which is it is a surprise. And the explanation is that they need to cross the T's, dot the I's. Well, it remains to be seen.
Oh, that'll have people sort of talking and speculating and on edge. Yeah. So ANZ Bank, right? They're predicting interest rates are going to drop to as low as 0.25%.
That's what they're forecasting. So their expectation is that the Reserve Bank is going to cut interest rates one more time. That's the official cash rate this year in November, again in February, and one more time in May to 0.25%. That's 0.25%. That's the official cash rate. Now, not everyone agrees, obviously, but that's what the ANZ Bank is forecasting, and they're the biggest bank in New Zealand. That's what they're expecting. They don't think they're going to go to negative, but look, 0.25%. It's not much, is it?
No, it's not.
And of course, it's because of the deteriorating global economic conditions. There's a lot of concern about recession. We're hearing that word bandied about quite a lot. We're hearing it in the context of the UK. We're hearing it in the context of the US. Good news is the U.S. trade talks are back on with China next month. They apparently are in close communication. That's made the market feel quite happy. And as a result,
what have you got for us?
I tell you what, we're up over more than 1% again today. The NZX Top 50 Index rose 112 points to 11,219. Yes, another record, by the way.
Yeah.
And our Kiwis holding pretty steady, considering this talk about cuts to interest rates, at 63.8 US cents, 93.6 Australian, and 51.8 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Have a fantastic weekend. That's Nona Peltier with our business news. Back to, sport here. Team New Zealand has reached a major milestone on the path to its defence of the America's Cup in Auckland in 2021. Attended by around 500 people at the syndicate headquarters on Auckland's Viaduct Harbour, the Cup holders officially launched their first boat. Our reporter Clay Wilson and camera operator Claire Easton-Farrelly were there.
I name this yacht Te Aihe. May God bless everyone who sails on it.
A traditional christening for a boat that is anything but. Welcome rain fell as the champagne was cracked on Team New Zealand's new boat outside their Viaduct Harbour base this morning. The launch of the boat, which reclaimed the America's Cup in 2017, was held in the same conditions.
We wanted it to rain, and we get it right. It's raining.
For Chief Executive Grant Dalton, the launch is the product of 2 years' work by more than 100 people.
I mean, we've been living it from 6 different ideas literally on an A4 piece of paper sketched up by the guys to this point where we, came down to one concept, developed that into today. So to me, it's a step. It's an important step for sure.
Named Te Aihe, the Māori word for dolphin, the black boat splashed with red, white and grey is a 75-foot long monohull designed to foil above the water, and the first of its kind to be revealed. As the 4 challenging teams get set to launch their first AC-75s, Dalton knew all of them were watching very closely from near and far.
We don't have a mortgage on all the good ideas, and nor do they. And I think the teams that over the years, in recent years, have kind of realised that just because they didn't think about it, it's not wrong, or not necessarily wrong. So when they start launching, we'll be monitoring them just as they're doing with us.
The launch, which included an impromptu speech from Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, revealed more than a year's worth of intensive design and build work. Head of the Kiwi Syndicate's design team, Dan Bernasconi, says Te Aihe is a state-of-the-art vessel, but not for long.
This is definitely a version 1, and there'll be a lot of things that we'll be trying to improve, as will everyone else. So Yeah, and in 18 months' time, these boats are going to look pretty dated. But right now, it's the cutting edge.
Bernasconi says they're hoping to be out on the Waitemata Harbour by early next week, with the first few steps likely to be tentative in such a high-tech machine.
Accelerating sort of from 0 knots to 15 knots until we get foiling is probably almost the hardest thing in this boat. So we'll be waiting for a weather window. If we can get out really with very little breeze at all, almost no breeze, we'd be happy just to go out and go through the motions of getting the sails up, checking the systems and everything works.
The man charged with getting behind the wheel, Team New Zealand helmsman Peter Burling, can't wait to find out what the new boat is capable of.
It's going to be an amazing thing to get out there and put it through its paces, and it'll definitely be a little step up on speed than the last ones, especially when you put it around a course, but it'll be pretty incredible seeing it flying for the first time.
While also excited, team boss Grant Dalton admits those first few test runs will also cause a few nerves.
So it's not like a normal boat that you can go out and sort of plop around for a little while, check everything, da-da-da. This is a boat that it's either in the water, stopped, or it's up and going. And there's not really a lot of grey in the middle, so when you pull the trigger, you better be ready.
He's optimistic they are, but having been the only team not to build a small-scale test boat, relying only on a highly advanced simulator till now, Dalton knows there's also still plenty of unknowns.
They're decisions we made. I don't know whether I'm confident about them. And, there's so many things that are happening now that you won't know the answer of until March 2021 when we race in the America's Cup. And that's the game. You make decisions and you back them, and then you work like hell to try and make those decisions right, even if you think they might be wrong.
More of those decisions are imminent, with just a few months before Team New Zealand needs to begin building their second boat to be used in the Cup Regatta. The first real action for this first version will come at World Series regattas in Europe and the US next year. Mō te hotaka o te hipo nei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
A former gang leader with a string of previous violent offences, including murder and rape, has been sent back to prison for 13 years for his part in the death of a Ngaruawahia man in July last year. 26-year-old Mitchell Patterson died from a chokehold in the back of a car in Hamilton, and his body was later thrown off the bridge at McLaren Falls in the Bay of Plenty. Leon Wilson, aged 49, was sentenced in the High Court in Hamilton for Mr Patterson's manslaughter, kidnapping and for conspiring to defeat justice. Our reporter Andrew McRae was in court.
A total of 8 people have now been sentenced for their part in Mr Patterson's death. Today, the man described as the ringleader behind the young father's death was sentenced with 2 others, Christopher Smith and Chloe Kerridge. Wilson was convicted of murder in 1996 and since being released has been on life parole. Justice Davison described Wilson's reaction to the death of Mr Patterson as callous.
You were clearly the driving force behind the events that led to Mr Patterson's abduction and subsequent death.
The judge outlined Wilson's criminal past.
Murder, sexual violation by rape, sexual violation by unlawful sexual connection and aggravated robbery. You were released on parole in 2011, and since then you have accumulated 4 convictions for breach of standard or special release conditions.
Wilson ordered his associates to bring Mr Patterson to him after hearing reports he had been bad-mouthing him. Crown Prosecutor Jacinda Foster said Wilson was a central figure in the death of Mr Patterson and his criminal background ruled out any mitigating features.
Who demonstrates a complete lack of insight in terms of his own role in this offending, who takes absolutely no responsibility for this death, and who presents at high risk of harm in the future.
Mr Patterson's family fronted in court, providing heartfelt victim impact statements. His mother, Valerie Patterson, pointedly asked Wilson if he knew what he and the others involved in her son's death had done to her family.
Losing Mitch is taking us on the loneliest, most desolate journey that I believe any parent can take. Our loss is unnatural and challenges our emotions every day. It causes pain, and we struggle with happiness in every way. Mitch was not only our only son, he was our only child.
His father, Craig Patterson, made it plain what he thought of Wilson and the 2 others being sentenced with him.
You 3 cowards have no idea what you have done to our family and close friends, and I doubt you even care. You all chose to participate in the cowardly act that has brought us here today. You are all despicable, and I despise all of you with every bone in my body.
Christopher Smith was jailed for 6 years for manslaughter and kidnapping, and Chloe Kerridge received a 2-year sentence for kidnapping and conspiring to defeat justice. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
It's almost 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, has died aged 95. Mr Mugabe was a Zimbabwean revolutionary and politician who served as Prime Minister from 1980 to 1987 and then as President from 1987 until his overthrow in 2017. It's understood that he died in a hospital in Singapore. The BBC's Shingai Nyoke has this report.
He was once Zimbabwe's liberator, leading a war against white minority rule. But by the end, the adulation President Robert Mugabe once enjoyed was gone. He cemented his power, winning overwhelmingly at elections in 1980. As leader of a new nation, he set about creating a better country than the one he inherited. And for a while, he succeeded.
There can never be any return to the state of armed conflict which existed before our commitment to peace and the democratic process of election under the Lancaster House Agreement. Surely, this is now time to beat our swords into plowshares.
But beneath the veneer lay a dark side. Mr Mugabe deployed a crack military unit to southern Zimbabwe to deal with hundreds of insurgents. Between 1983 and 1987, thousands were murdered, and the world turned a blind eye. Mugabe was the great hope. But as the 1990s ended, the economy was bottoming out, and a new political party was on the rise. Seemingly desperate to regain popularity, Mr Mugabe played a political hand. Land seized by the colonial government was still in the hands of the white minority. Sensing the frustration, Mugabe encouraged blacks to take back their land, and they did, often violently. The Western world took note, breaking diplomatic ties and imposing economic sanctions. The opposition, its leaders, human rights workers bore the brunt of his anger. In 2008, in the midst of billion% inflation and widespread unemployment, Mr Mugabe suffered his first electoral defeat. It only led to more violence in the second round of voting. Britain stripped him of his knighthood, and former allies condemned him.
Nearer to home, we had seen the outbreak of violence against fellow Africans in our own country, and the tragic failure of leadership in our neighboring Zimbabwe.
But he remained a cult-like figure among many Africans for daring to challenge Western political dominance on the world's affairs.
In retaliation for the measures we took to empower the black majority, the United Kingdom has mobilized friends and allies in Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand to impose illegal economic sanctions against Zimbabwe.
But within his own party, discontent was rising. Many believed he had overstayed and needed to hand over power. His second wife, Grace Mugabe, 40 years his junior, seemed to be gaining power, and she began accusing then Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa of trying to oust them. Mr Mugabe finally fired his longtime aide, accusing him of trying to topple him. Mr Mnangagwa, with the help of the military, mounted a comeback, posting soldiers on the streets and placing Mr Mugabe under house arrest. Tens of thousands of Zimbabweans marched, calling on him to step down. And after the threat of impeachment, he resigned. Many will remember him as a gifted orator and visionary who liberated Zimbabwe, but later returned her to the shackles of oppression.
And that's Shingai Nyoke with that report on Robert Mugabe's death at age 95. It is one of the most enduring mysteries, but now a team of scientists led by a New Zealander has suggested a fishy new theory about the Loch Ness Monster. David Doyle reports.
The mystery around Scotland's fabled Loch Ness Monster may have finally been solved, with scientists suggesting it could well be an eel, albeit a very big one. A group of international scientists analysed DNA found in the loch's icy waters. Those results ruled out the presence of large animals such as dinosaurs, said the team's leader, Professor Neil Gemmell.
Plesiosaur is extinct, but very clearly a reptile, so it should sit somewhere between crocodilians and birds, and there's nothing remotely like that in our sequences.
When a creature moves through an environment, it leaves fragments of DNA, which can be sequenced to identify it. In Loch Ness, the scientists found an abundance of eel DNA.
So eels are 4 to 6 foot in length. It's plausible that there might be one or two that grow to extreme size.
The theory of a giant eel has been around for decades, and Gemmell did also point out that one has never been found. There have also been many other attempts to find and identify the monster. Gemmell's favourite suggestion is the Loch Ness Monster is a creature that wouldn't show up in his team's testing.
My personal favourite, Nessie is an extraterrestrial, so won't have DNA.
And that was Professor Neil Gemmell from the University of Otago ending that report from David Doyle. Education Ministry boss Iona Holstead appears safe in her job for now, with the Minister expressing confidence in her following revelations about contracts given to a disgraced former school principal. The Ministry is conducting a full internal review into its contract procurement process after it gave work to a former principal who had his registration revoked for serious misconduct. A Teaching Council disciplinary tribunal found that Mr Fairhall breached professional boundaries during a school trip to Mexico in 2017. That included sleeping in the same bed as a student while naked, sexualised talk and being partially clothed in front of students, and entering a bathroom and washing the back of a student. But it's been revealed that the Ministry has awarded 6 contracts to his company, Tarapo Limited, worth around $500,000 in total since 2016. 5 of those were after the allegations were made. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
Allegations about Unuku Fairhall first surfaced in February 2017 after a Te Kura Kaupapa Māori o Te Kuutu school trip to Mexico. A complaint was made a month later to the police, who then advised the Ministry of Education, and an investigation was launched. But it wasn't until the findings of the Teaching Council's disciplinary tribunal were made public in August this year, the remaining contract he had with the ministry was terminated. The Secretary for Education, Iona Holstead, would not be interviewed today, but speaking to News Hub last night, it was clear it had all become too much.
I take full responsibility, and I have apologised to you, and to the public, and to my minister. I have not offered my resignation to the minister.
Will you?
That is not something I have decided to do at this stage.
At this stage, but it's something you might consider doing.
I'd like this interview to stop.
In a statement today, she doubled down on her decision not to resign and says she had apologised to the minister for failing to meet the standards expected of the ministry. Ms Holstead says the ministry did not know the findings until they were made public, but added the ministry should not have continued to contract with Tarapo Limited after serious allegations about Mr Fairhall's conduct were raised. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, is sticking by her.
I've accepted the Secretary's apology. I do have full confidence in her. I think there are clearly lessons to be learned here. I do expect better from the Ministry, and I've got confidence that the work that the Secretary for Education is doing to tighten up things is going to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again in the future.
Ms Holstead agreed with the Teaching Council that the information sharing agreement between the two organisations will be strengthened. An external auditor will now check there are no similar contracts in place, and an internal review will be held into every aspect of the procurement process for these contracts. But National's education spokesperson, Nikki Kay, says the investigation mustn't stay in-house.
Ultimately, it's been very sloppy. You've got a situation where a principal slept naked with students and then was paid hundreds of thousands of dollars on contracts while being investigated. That's totally unacceptable. And from my perspective, given the way the Ministry and the Minister have handled this, we need to have an independent investigation.
The Ministry of Education maintains Mr Fairhall was not in contact with any children as part of his contract work. But ACT Party leader David Seymour says that raises another red flag.
Education is supposed to be fundamentally about children, and if you can earn 10 times a teacher's starting salary without having any contact with children, then the priorities in education have gone seriously wrong.
David Seymour says the ministry needs to get rid of the waste and bureaucracy to free up more money for teachers. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
The All Blacks took to Garden Place in Hamilton today to serve up some snags and mingle with fans ahead of tomorrow's final Rugby World Cup warm-up test against Tonga. While the game might not mean much on paper, it means plenty to the players, especially the Chiefs boys who don't get to play many tests in Waikato. Not to mention some Kiwi Tongans who will be playing for their country of heritage in front of their families for the first time. Rugby reporter Joe Porter is in Hamilton.
A lone warrior welcoming the All Blacks to Hamilton City, but hundreds of fans turned out to share a sausage and a selfie with their favourite players, including Chiefs prop Angus Ta'avao.
Just looking at the line before, and it's awesome to see the people of Hamilton. I mean, All Blacks don't come here too often, so awesome opportunity for them to come down and see some of their favourite players. Sonny's down there signing autographs. He's a hot favourite, so people are pretty excited.
You've got about 4 Chiefs here. Why is he the hot favourite? We've got a stack of Chiefs here this morning.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's the hot favourite anywhere we go, really. But, with 8 Chiefs in the squad, 4 here this morning, it's pretty awesome to be able to represent this place and have these passionate fans out here.
Ta'avao and the All Blacks will need all those fans if they're to drown out the sea of Tongan supporters who are looking to paint Hamilton red.
The Tongan fans are so passionate. You saw what happened with the Rugby League and Matimata Tonga, so we're expecting it almost to be 50-50, if not more, Tongan supporters. But that just adds to it. The atmosphere and they're very vocal fans, and it's an exciting sort of team to play against. So we're just embracing it.
Tongan wing Cooper Vuna was born and raised in Otahuhu, played rugby league for the Warriors and Newcastle Knights before taking on rugby with the Melbourne Rebels, and he now plies his trade in England. He says it's special to be part of Ikalia Tahi.
It means a lot. I think it's beyond words that you can explain how much emotion that comes with the jersey. It's just another privilege to even put it on. But to play in front of your family and a New Zealand crowd, it's obviously going to mean a lot more. So, something that we'll be quite proud about.
Vuna is playing for Tonga in front of his family for the first time, and he'll be pumped if the Ikalia Tahi can attract half as much support as the Tongan League team do when they play in New Zealand.
I've obviously been brought up here in Auckland, in Otahuhu, so this is definitely home for me. I guess if we get that sea of a wave that the league team has got in previous years, it would be a treat for us.
And Vuna is caught in the same conundrum as many All Blacks and Tongan players this week, with an army of family desperate to cheer their boys on in the flesh.
We've only got 2 tickets and the prices are pretty expensive and our budget ain't that big, so I think we're scrambling all for everyone else's tickets and who's not using tickets, so there's a lot of people coming.
It's those people that will make what is otherwise a test of no significance an occasion worth experiencing. In Hamilton, mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Joe Porter aho.
It's likely the most expensive bottle of beer in history. An Australian cricket journalist has been mistakenly charged, wait for it, £55,000 for a bottle of beer at Manchester Hotel. Peter Laylor ordered the, Deutsches IPA at the city's Male Mason Hotel. He was later stunned to discover his credit card had been charged $99,000. Whose credit card would take $99,000? Anyway, Mr. Laylor, who writes for the Australian newspaper, was in the city covering the Ashes series. The BBC's Andy Moore has the story.
On Sunday evening, Mr. Lawler went into a hotel bar for a swift one. He was supposed to pay £5.50 for his bottle of beer using a card machine. But the barmaid inserted a few too many zeros, and the bill came out by mistake at £55,000. He was assured it had been cancelled. Then, a few days later, came a call from his worried wife back in Australia, telling him a huge amount had come out of their bank account. He's now in the process of trying to get his money back. The beer in question was an award-winning Scottish IPA.
Well, it was good, but it wasn't £55,000 good. But, there's no drink in the world worth £55,000 in my opinion. That's more than my car cost, more than 3 of my cars cost.
Mr Lawler now believes he has consumed the most expensive beer in history, and he's also a wiser man.
I've learnt one lesson, that at a certain stage in life, don't be so vain as to not wear your glasses when you're out. Put your glasses on and check the bill before you pay it.
Mr Lawler has been told it will take 10 working days to get his money back, but he has received some good news. The bank has kindly agreed to refund the additional £1,000 transaction fee they charged him.
I'm still stunned that a journalist has a $99,000 limit on their credit card. Anyway, that was Andy Moore with that report. Let's get to your feedback now very quickly about the airport, potentially at Whenuapai. This from the West Side Tory, aka Tau Henere. He says he'd really like an airport there. Hell yes, he says. It's 5 minutes away and I might even apply for a job at security. Jay from Auckland says we shouldn't have 2 airports in Auckland for the same reason we shouldn't have 2 ports. Duplication of expensive infrastructure. We should fix the transport problems to the existing airport, not build another one. And this person says of Chris Luxon, he's an idiot. Oh, that's a bit harsh. Many of us travelling to Auckland for international connections are not really going to go from Whenuapai to Mangere.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātawa tēnei. The former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, has died in a Singapore hospital at the age of 95. Mr Mugabe began his political career as a leader in the quest for the independence of Zimbabwe, then known as Rhodesia. As a revolutionary guerrilla leader, he fought white minority rule and spent 10 years in jail as a political prisoner. He eventually went on to become Zimbabwe's first post-independence leader in 1980 and was praised internationally as the hope of his nation. However, he waged a mounting campaign of oppression, violence and corruption and drove into poverty a country once known as the breadbasket of southern Africa. His abuse of power angered the Commonwealth, which suspended Zimbabwe in 2002.
In retaliation for the measures we took to empower the black majority, the United Kingdom has mobilized friends and allies in Europe, North America, Australia and New Zealand to impose illegal economic sanctions against Zimbabwe.
Robert Mugabe was eventually ousted in 2017 after 37 years in power. A jury has heard an Auckland teenager refused help from the police shortly before the Crown says she was murdered. Toko Shane Winter and Kerry Te Amo are on trial for the murder of 17-year-old Demetrius Pairama. Annika Smith reports from the High Court in Auckland.
The Crown says Miss Winter and Mr Tiamo tortured and hanged the teenager in a derelict state house in Mangere last July. Constable Ricky Naida visited the house that day and said a Māori teenager in tears answered the door. He said he offered to help the teenager. The Crown says this was Miss Pairama, but she was hostile and refused to leave the house, so he left. The court has heard the 17-year-old's body was later found in a metal drum at the back of the property. The trial continues. Ātawite ko Te Matua ko Annika Smith aho.
A man on parole for murder has been sent back to prison for the death of a man in Hamilton in July last year. Mitchell Patterson died in a chokehold in the back of a car and his body was later thrown over the bridge at McLaren's Fall in Bay of Plenty. Leon Wilson has been sentenced in the High Court in Hamilton to 13 years jail for manslaughter, kidnapping and conspiring to defeat the course of justice. The 49-year-old's prior convictions include rape, unlawful sexual violation and aggravated robbery. Justice Davison described him as the ringleader and driving force behind the death of 26-year-old Mr Patterson. Another man, Christopher Smith, was jailed for 6 years for manslaughter and kidnapping, and a woman, Chloe Kerridge, got 2 years for kidnapping and conspiring to defeat justice. A total of 8 people have now been sentenced over Mr Patterson's death. Health officials say the number of measles cases in Auckland is still rising and they can't say when that will change. The number of confirmed measles cases in Auckland this year has risen to 881, 4 more than yesterday. A medical officer of health, William Ranger, says it's impossible to say when the outbreak will peak.
All we can go on, and I'm talking about Auckland here, is the actual cases day by day and week by week. And following that, we're still increasing. So we're still on the upward trend at the moment. How long for? We can't predict with accuracy.
William Ranger says Pacific people have been disproportionately affected by the outbreak. Security at Parliament has been temporarily tightened since a small number of protesters tried to charge into one of the parliamentary buildings this afternoon. RNZ understands the activists that tried to enter Bowen House but were removed by security guards. The main entrance to the Beehive has been locked and security is controlling who can enter and exit. The Lambton Quay entrance to Bowen House has also been shut off. All staff and guests are being directed to the Bowen Street entrance. The Australian government is reviving a controversial proposal to drug test welfare recipients. The plan has twice been rejected by Parliament since 2017. Amy Greenbank reports.
The 2-year trial would take place in Bankstown in Sydney, Logan in Queensland and Mandurah in Western Australia, with youth allowance and New Start recipients tested for a range of drugs, including ice and cocaine. If they fail, they'd be put on an income management plan. A second positive test could lead to a drug treatment program. The Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton says it's important to combat addiction.
It's not about a punishment.
The Coalition is discussing the proposal with the crossbench.
Amy Greenbank in Canberra. A $12 million injection from the Provincial Growth Fund means the long-planned earthquake strengthening and redevelopment of Whanganui's Sargent Gallery can go ahead. The Parliamentary Under-Secretary for Regional Economic Development, Fletcher Tambuto, made the announcement today as part of the gallery's centenary celebrations. The money will go towards the construction of a new wing alongside the Category 1 listed heritage building. It's been estimated the redevelopment will attract 22,000 additional visitors to the gallery and generate about $11 million in new spending in the region. New Plymouth residents inconvenienced by a sewage pipe blockage have been told they can flush their toilets again. The District Council says the blockage caused about 60 tonnes of animal fat. Was caused by 60 tonnes of animal fat, and that has since been cleared. It affected households in the suburbs of Moturoa, Blagden and Spotswood. Fat and sewage were discharged onto Ngamotu Beach, and the council says clean-up work will continue over the weekend. It's coming up to 6 minutes past 6. The Silver Ferns greats Laura Langman and Maria Folau will extend their international netball careers beyond the World Cup. Both were key figures in New Zealand's World Cup triumph in Liverpool in July, but it had been thought they could follow veteran defender Casey Korpua into retirement. The pair have been included in a 16-strong squad that will be trimmed to 12 for next month's 4-test Constellation Cup series against Australia. Coach Nolene Tauroa says she discussed retirement with Langman and Folau, but is pleased they've committed to the Constellation Cup and the Northern Quad Series in England in January. The new coach of the New Zealand women's cricket team wants to develop more power in his players. Former Black Caps assistant Bob Carter has been appointed to the job through to the 2021 Women's World Cup in New Zealand. He says the side can get better in a number of areas.
I want us to hit the ball harder. I believe we can do that. I think sometimes we look a little bit too, perhaps we want to be technically proficient, but we've got power, we've got skill within our group.
The Black Caps will chase a series clean sweep in the third and final T20 against Sri Lanka in Kandy overnight. Meanwhile, England will resume on 23-1 on day 3 of the 4th Ashes Test, chasing Australia's imposing first innings total of 497 for 8 declared. And the Wallabies captain David Pocock has announced he'll retire from Test rugby after the World Cup in Japan. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, the truth about bacon and other things from one of the world's leading statisticians. Will court rulings against drug companies help curb the opioid epidemic in the United States? I'll talk to movie directors Samoan Sima Urale and Brazilian David Sherman. And to the woman who got upskirting, made a criminal offence in the UK. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to North Taranaki, including Taumaranui and Coromandel Peninsula. Showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms and hail from Auckland northwards. Showers gradually easing tomorrow. Southwesterly gales in Northland easing tonight. Bay of Plenty and Taupo mostly cloudy with a few showers clearing tomorrow. For the remainder of the North Island, also Marlborough, occasional rain, snow about the desert road overnight, clearing tomorrow morning, but the chance of a shower remains in Marlborough and Wairarapa. Southwesterly gales this evening and overnight for Wellington, Wairarapa and Marlborough. Nelson and Buller, showers clearing from the south today, mainly fine tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, fine weather. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy. Showers becoming confined to the coast tomorrow morning and becoming fine inland. Chatham Islands, periods of rain with low cloud and fog. RNZ National, it's coming up to 9 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. I'm Lisa Owen and this is Checkpoint. Robert Mugabe, former Prime Minister and President of Zimbabwe, whose rule was mired in accusations of human rights abuses and corruption, has died aged 95. His 40-year leadership of the former British colony was marked with bloodshed, persecution of political opponents and vote rigging on a large scale. David Coulthard is a founding member of the opposition movement for democratic change. He is a former Zimbabwean Minister of Education, Sport, Arts and Culture in a government of national unity and joins us now live from Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. Good morning to you, David. People are just obviously waking up to this news in your part of the world. How are they reacting?
Well, it's been expected for some time. We've known that he's been ailing for years, so there won't be any shocks here. And I think they're mixed feelings. He is the person, of course, who delivered the end of white minority rule, and he has other positive legacies, such as his contribution to the expansion of education in the country. But, of course, he has a very negative legacy, which your introduction spoke about, a legacy of violence and corruption. He is responsible for the destruction of the Zimbabwean economy over the last 40 years. So they're mixed feelings.
So which of those feelings do you think will dominate when Robert Mugabe is laid to rest?
Robert Mugabe managed to redeem some of his image in the country in the last few years. During the inclusive government between 2009 and 2013, he mellowed a bit. He accommodated the opposition. The incidence of violence and disappearance dropped dramatically. And then, of course, he was removed in this coup d'etat in 2017. He spoke out against Emmerson Mnangagwa, the person responsible for the coup, and actually endorsed Nelson Chamisa, the opposition leader in the election last year. So he certainly got a lot more support right across the country. So I think that the dominant sentiment will be sadness that he has left us. There's no doubt he was a colossus on the Zimbabwean stage. If we look back at the history over the last 100 years or so, he has had the most significant impact on the country, arguably, of any person in the last 100 years. That will be remembered. People do not forget his contribution in ending white minority rule. And I think that will probably be the dominant sentiment. But it is tinged, as I say, by this understanding that during his rule, there was a genocide, there have been crimes against humanity, and millions of people have been forced into economic and political exile. And he is held responsible for that.
He was obviously being treated in a Singapore hospital. Do you know much of the last months of his life?
He's been ailing for some time. I saw a photograph of him a couple of weeks ago, and he appeared to be very sickly. He was 95. He was a remarkably fit man. He ate well, he exercised, and he still had most of his mental faculties. Last year, for example, on the eve of the election, he gave a press conference, then aged 93 or 94, and he was remarkably articulate in his endorsement of Nelson Chamisa. But he was 95. He obviously just faded away at the end.
It's early days yet, I know, but how do you think that his burial and funeral arrangements will be handled? I just remember at the Pope's funeral with the situation with Prince Charles, who shook Mugabe's hand, and it caused a huge outcry. How will it be handled? Do you think people will stay away, or what will the situation be?
No, I don't think that people will stay away. I think we're going to see a combination of things. I mean, firstly, there are going to be a lot of crocodile tears shed. Mr. Mnangagwa, who removed Mugabe through the coup, has already, posted on Twitter condolences messages. I think the state will give him a complete state funeral, and they will ignore the fact that they differed. And the other aspect to it is that in terms of African culture, there's a principle that you honour the dead. You don't speak wrong of the dead. And so I suspect that there's going to be a massive turnout to his funeral. Bear in mind as well that Robert Mugabe was far more popular outside of Zimbabwe than he was within Zimbabwe. He was viewed by Africans right across the continent as the person who ended white minority rule, who played a significant role in that regard in ending apartheid. And so he is an icon in Africa, and I suspect that we will see heads of state right across Africa attending his funeral, and the negative side of his legacy will be forgotten at this time. That definitely is the way African culture will handle his passing.
Thank you so much for your time. That is David Coulthard there speaking about the death of the former Prime Minister and President of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, who has died at the age of 95. The government is still trying to work out which benefit sanctions to scrap, despite promises to remove the most excessive measures. Almost 2 years into its term in office, the only sanction that's been axed is the one on solo mums who don't name the father of their child, and that doesn't come into effect until April next year. Solo mums still face penalties if they don't meet their work obligations without good reason or fail to have their children enrolled at a medical centre. That has advocates calling on the government to speed up its response to help get families out of hardship. Our social issues reporter Sarah Robson has the story.
Josephine is one of the lucky ones. She's a solo mum of 2, and for 6.5 years she was having $25 docked from her benefit because she hadn't named the father of her youngest. But with the help of an advocate, she went through the process of getting an exemption. The sanction's been removed and she got back paid $8,000.
So that's incredible to not only have a lump sum, but also have the sanction lifted, which is every time my card declines. That's not going to happen for an extra $25. That's another, gets me a day closer to payday.
The Child Poverty Action Group has been among those pushing for an end to benefit sanctions. Its economics spokesperson, Susan St John, says they have exacerbated the hardship many sole parent families in particular are facing. She says the government should be acting far more quickly to repeal the sanction on solo mums who don't name the father of their child, as well as other penalties affecting families with children.
Removal of the sanctions when there are children is a critical step, and it's disappointing that the government is very slow to act and that the removal of the sanction for not naming the father doesn't take effect until next year. If it's unjust next year, it's unjust right now, and it was unjust for many years.
The Social Development Minister, Carmel Sepuloni, says further changes are being looked at. But she says they're still working out how the rules might be changed fairly without leaving the system open to exploitation. One area that has been identified already is the subsequent child rule, which means if you have another child while on the benefit, work obligations kick in when your youngest is 1 rather than 3.
And it's making sure that that balance is there. And so we will be looking at excessive sanctions. And as I said, it is about what is fair, what is reasonable, what is effective. And those will be the things that we take into consideration.
After RNZ's story in May last year about a woman who was told her benefit had been cut because she'd been on 2 Tinder dates, changes were made to the way the Ministry of Social Development signs off on sanctions, and 2 people need to do it instead of 1. That's resulted in a 30% drop in the number imposed in the last year. Carmel Sepuloni says that suggests penalties weren't previously being applied in a consistent and appropriate way.
I was concerned that actually any case manager, without any oversight, no matter how long that they'd been in the role, could actually apply sanctions to someone. And I thought, whoa, that's a very serious decision to have to make, and surely there should be someone with some sort of supervision authority to actually check that the decision being made was the right decision.
Kay Reid from the Ministry of Social Development says they've been focused on giving their staff better training so they can make the right decision. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
And you can hear more about the welfare system and the plight of solo mums on Insight this Sunday morning after the 8 o'clock news, or you can podcast it now at rnz.co.nz/insight. It is 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. When it comes to fixing the country's polluted waterways, the major focus has been on farms, but urban councils could also be facing clean-up bills of billions of dollars. Our reporter Harry Locke has been investigating the potential impact of the government's action plan for healthy waterways on the towns and cities where most New Zealanders live.
In the capital, you're never far from native bush, such as here at Otari Native Bush Reserve. But for the network of waterways that crisscross the city, having a population of over 200,000 people does have an impact. Forest and Birds freshwater conservation advocate Annabeth Cohen, who showed me around Otari today, says it may look pristine, but urban waterways across the country are under threat.
There's major water quality issues there that include pathogens like E. coli, nitrogen and sediment are issues in urban waterways. I think the water quality issue in urban environments is quite complex.
Urban waterways face the same pollution problems as rural areas, but the levels are usually higher in cities and towns. A government report earlier this year found 94% of rivers running through urban areas were not suitable for swimming due to the risk of Campylobacter infection. Annabeth Cohen says human activity is to blame, as nutrients, pathogens and chemicals from businesses and households are dumped into stormwater and wastewater networks.
You've got sedimentation from development, E. coli and pathogens will probably be the main sources with regards to sewerage overflow. And then you've got traffic, just major transport, metals and chemicals that are associated with driving a car.
The government's plan to clean up waterways includes national standards for managing stormwater and wastewater and tighter controls over urban development to stop sediment loss. But Annabeth Cohen says this doesn't go far enough.
The proposals go a long way with addressing water quality issues, with addressing fish passage, the piping up and burying of streams, it addresses that. A lot of them need to be a bit stronger. All New Zealand waterways will be affected by this policy.
Planner and long-time Clean Water campaigner Greg Carlyon says the science behind the national policy statement is solid, but it won't be cheap. Standards for both wastewater and stormwater are patchy and inconsistent. Where they even exist, resource consents are so poorly drafted, it's hard for regulators to monitor them.
There are 29 large-scale community discharges into the Manawatu River. The vast majority of them are either dated or non-compliant. Our very biggest one in Palmerston North City has been non-compliant for in excess of a decade. So we have to prioritise where the money goes, and the money required is in the many, many billions.
And just today in Taranaki, there was a graphic example of what's at stake. A sewage spill on Ngāmotu Beach is being blamed on a 60-tonne fatberg, a chunk of animal fat blocking a sewerage pipe. While it isn't quite the fatberg that weighed the equivalent of 11 double-deckers that cropped up in London 2 years ago, it's not what Kiwi urbanites will want to be hearing about regularly, let alone seeing or even smelling. The government says it's currently looking into the costing for upgrading wastewater systems. The Associate Minister for the Environment, Nanaia Mahuta, says this plan will provide a clearer picture to councils and help them progress in the right direction.
I want to specifically acknowledge the local government sector who have been working with us around a plan forward, because it will be an incremental approach to ensure, firstly, that we've got the standards that are clear and consistent, and secondly, that there is a plan around what they do in the infrastructure space.
The government says detailed wastewater and stormwater proposals will be consulted on at a later date, probably in the middle of next year. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
An Auckland medical centre wants the cost of ordering extra supplies of the measles vaccine to be waived. There are now 881 cases of measles in Auckland, up 4 from yesterday. It's causing serious strain on GP clinics, which are struggling to cope with pressure associated with the serious outbreak. Our health reporter Karen Brown reports.
Pressure on vaccines is intense in Auckland, where many GP practices know exactly how many jabs they have left and who's first in line to get it. At Papakura East Medical Centre, they got extra stock 2 days ago and have enough left for 40 people. But their next scheduled resupply is 2 weeks away, and practice nurse Jan Christensen says they'll need to eke it out.
The more needier side of our population, but we're also giving it to people who are requesting it as a precaution against catching the measles. So we've given about 50 doses in the last 3 days.
She says if they order more before mid-September, they face a $45 delivery fee, which she concedes doesn't sound like a lot.
We're always mindful of the expenditure that is created, and with this one it could potentially be quite a lot more than just $45 at a time, just due to the fact that we can't get the stock in fast enough or maintain a high number of vaccines due to our logistics of our cold chain.
The measles vaccines, which can come in large boxes, must be accommodated at exactly the right temperature in a fridge, also containing other vital medicines. Ms Christensen says for these reasons and others, GPs shouldn't have to pay for rapid resupply of the measles vaccine.
What we would like to see during this epidemic and the high demand of vaccines that are required within the practice, that the delivery fee be waived for us from the pro-pharma company, because they're the ones that charge us for extra deliveries.
The drug buyer Pharmac says there's no shortage of vaccine nationally, and it provided 3 months' worth in 4 days this week, 36,000 doses. But an Auckland vaccine expert, Helen Pertussis-Harris, says health officials have lost control of the outbreak, which some are labelling an epidemic. She says a national campaign or program is needed.
It's the only way we're going to stop this from happening and stop it from happening in the future. And it's not just an Auckland thing. There are many people across the country that are susceptible. I think it needs to be a national-led intervention, and it needs to be quick.
An Auckland Medical Officer of Health, William Ranger, told media this afternoon health officials don't know when measles will peak.
All we can go on, and I'm talking about Auckland here, is the actual cases day by day and week by week. And following that, we're still increasing. So we're still on the upward trend at the moment. How long for? We can't predict with accuracy.
He adds Pacific people in Auckland are being particularly hard hit.
The proportion of cases being seen in Auckland is about 40%, whereas the population of Pacific people in Auckland is much, much less than that.
Officials say there is more than enough vaccine in the country at 35,000 doses, with another 52,000 doses arriving late next week. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Karen Brown aho.
Some parents of a Christchurch primary school are raising concerns about the school's strict food policy. This comes after a complaint was laid against Waitakere Primary School after a teacher allegedly stopped a child for eating a muffin they brought in for snack time. The parent who complained met with the principal today, who told RNZ the teacher involved has taken today off because of all the attention. Alicia Foon reports.
New Brighton resident Tammy Campbell says she was baffled after her daughter was stopped from eating a home-baked banana choc chip muffin during healthy snack time on 2 occasions this week.
My daughter came home after school and said that the teacher had taken it off her, and then went to her school bag, got her lunchbox out and took it over to the office to go through its contents with the deputy principal.
And she decided to lay a formal complaint to Waitakere Primary School earlier this week over their reaction.
She was very embarrassed. and she's now very wary and asking if she's going to get in trouble for eating a nice amount of her lunchbox.
Today, Waitakere School Principal Andrew Barker told RNZ the incident happened during healthy snack time because other children were asking why the child was allowed a choc chip muffin. He says it didn't mean the muffin couldn't be eaten later in the day. He says he would meet the parent who complained today to apologise, but would not say anything further. However, parents outside Waitakere School were happy to speak to RNZ, with some saying the rules were excessive, but others not so sure.
It shouldn't be, but I don't think the teacher went around it the right way. It's not fair on the other kids on why one child gets to eat a muffin but the rest of them eat rice crackers or something healthy.
It was actually ridiculous. I don't think it was okay. I mean, it was just a muffin. It didn't have like heavy icing or anything like that. It was just a plain old muffin.
I think that it was probably a little bit too far-fetched, and I know that I certainly here and there for just, you know, a bit of enjoyment for the kids, I'll put a biscuit in their lunchbox. So that's probably worse than what that muffin was.
At times I have got frustrated because I felt that I'm not doing good enough as a parent in their eyes. I can manage that and I can deal with that because I know just how much heart and soul is in this school.
Regulating school lunches during healthy snack time. A recipe that's still being perfected. For Checkpoint, ko Elisha Fern tēnei.
Just before we go, we've been talking about the prospect of another airport in Auckland at Whenuapai. Tau Henare got in touch to say that he'd support it and maybe he'd apply for a job there as a security guard. Someone else has got in touch to say Tau Henare could use Trevor Mallard as a referee should Tau apply to be a security guard at Whenuapai Airport. We'll let them both know. Hey, thanks for joining us. You can check out some of our visual stories online. Do have a wonderful weekend and thanks for being with us this evening. We'll be back next week.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The former long-time president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, has died in a Singapore hospital at the age of 95. He had been in ill health for some time. Customs says the largest shipment of meth ever intercepted was likely not the first to reach this country, nor will it be the last. Just under half a tonne of the drug has been found hidden in a shipment of electric motors from Thailand. And health officials say the number of measles cases in Auckland is still rising and they can't say when that will change. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Assuming that doesn't win, Parliament will be prorogued for 5 weeks, and God knows what will happen then.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
Look, littering is a behaviour, but it's a behaviour that can be changed.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
Does cash have a future in our shops? Are people going to start